This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Radar, and I'm so excited to be speaking with Tatiana Maslany about She-Hulk. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, good. I was recently in Austin for South by Southwest for the first time since 2019, which is when I had the chance to see Pink Wall, and we
Oh
met
yeah.
for an interview back then, which was really a little bit different tonally, I think, than She-Hulk, but another great
Lightning.
opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how long was She-Hulk in the works before it ended up coming out?
Well, so I auditioned in 2020, in summer of 2020, and then got the part. And then I think we went into production March 2021. And yeah, so there was the whole, and then when did it even come out? It came out a year later, I think, which is incredibly fast turnaround, given that it was like I think the most CG, like the most a lead character has been CG in a TV show, which is enormous. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you were obviously with Orphan Black, where were played a bunch of clones, and I'm sure that's a trippy visual experience. We'll talk about that later. But what is it like just seeing yourself and just not seeing yourself when you're looking with all the CG?
Yeah, so the process was so informative actually, because there's this massive technical like learning curve for me at least. When I'm playing She-Hulk, I'm in this mocap suit that it feels nothing like what the character ends up looking like. I feel like I'm like a little kid in pajamas with like a helmet on, and I've got a camera here in front of my face. So it makes connecting with your fellow actor a different experience. There's something to kind of have to look around. And for them too, they're looking at me while I'm walking on these platforms, or they're looking at like a little like face of mine that's like stuck to a helmet on my head so that they can like keep the eye line. So there's a lot of elements that would make it incredibly difficult to connect as actors. But I think it's also informative in terms of, for me at least, Jen doesn't feel like she's a different person when she's She-Hulk. And so the response of everyone else to her of like, whoa, is destabilizing for her. She doesn't get it. She's like, I'm still me. And she's so attached to that idea of like, nothing's changed, I'm still me. That, me being in this like the same body that I'm in is helpful. And having everyone look at me differently is also helpful, because I'm like, why, what's different? I'm still the same size, I'm still the same everything. Um, and there's like a loneliness to that, and like an outsiderness to that, and also like it's funny, like it's absurd. So all of that really helps play into the show, I think.
I remember watching Orphan Black that when we'd see a clone who didn't see all the time, I was like, oh, it's great that they got, a guest star to come in and do this. And I was like, no, wait a minute, it's the same person, which is,
Yeah.
it's about how talented you are, but also I'm sure it's a challenge to, because she's being seen differently by people, she still does act a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that for me was like the most interesting sort of um like nut to open up, which was like this. And I'm always interested in identity, as is evidenced by Orphan Black. That was sort of like what sort of broke open my curiosity about how we present in the world and how that elicits response, or how people judge us or decide who we are based on how we look. And so much of She-Hulk is like she's in a different body, and suddenly being treated differently, being respected differently, or being objectified differently, or being just her identity is being decided on by everyone else just based on the body that she's inhabiting. And that to me is such a complex, wonderful concept, done of course like with like humor, but to me it speaks to something deeper that I feel like we're all experiencing in different ways in the world now, and it feels very fertile, fertile ground to kind of be jumping off of.
I also like her attitude towards the name that she gets because there's a lot that I think, Marvel is stuck with because of years and years of, what the comics were. And so it's nice to see a sort of fresh take on all that.
Totally. And that like irreverence was there from the start when She-Hulk came out in the comics in like the 80s. She had this sense of she was seeing all the mechanisms and she was seeing the mechanism in which she was operating. And she was sort of like talking to the writer and being like, this is not, I don't want this. Why do you have me naked here skipping rope or whatever? Like all of these like great little like asides that she does. And to bring that into our show with the asides to camera and the breaking of the fourth wall and all of that like awareness of the mechanism feels very very different for Marvel, and yeah, super fun to kind of poke fun at it.
And I want to come back to that, but I'm curious about your own history with comic books before this show.
Archie comics, uh Mouse. I loved Mouse. It was like graphic novels when I was in my 20s. I was like really into graphic novels. Persepolis was one that I loved. Uh I was like dabbling in it, but I was never like a superhero comic reader. Because I didn't know about She-Hulk. I didn't know that world. And so it just never really felt like it was for me. So this is like my first, this is my dipping in.
Apprehensive about not having this comic book background, just even coming in for the role.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, because it also felt like because of her placement in the sort of universe and the way she, she's not like Wong who has like like she's not like inside of the world in a way. She's like watching it from the outside in so many ways and like relates to her cousin as her cousin, and sort of makes fun of the fact that he's a superhero. Like there's an outsiderness to her entry into it that made me feel like I think this is a correct way to come into it, like not knowing every single thing.
Sort of like a zombie movie or a horror movie that with a main character who doesn't watch zombie or horror movies, so everyone else knows what to expect. But which leads to
Exactly.
some comedy.
Yeah, so you go along the ride with her.
Did you do any sort of research, looking at other Marvel movies or TV? Because part of the fun, I think, of watching shows like this for the Marvel, addicts is that there are so many little teases and other characters we get to see.
Yeah, I mean, all of those like Easter eggs had to be just like explained to me in great detail and then like referenced back to like where these things come from. Um, it was an education for me entirely. My research was really in like reading the comics and reading She-Hulk throughout the years and drawing from all the different ways that she was drawn as well. Um, Drawing from how she was drawn, but looking at those, I'm so curious about different artistic interpretations of a character. That's what's so neat about these comics is that she looks physically different always. She has a sense of humor, but it's not always the same tone. Sometimes she's in heavy dramas, like sometimes she's drawn very differently, more muscular, more like with thinner, whatever. And it's just all of that was really informative to me.
Is there anything that is substantially different, you would say, about the look and feel of the show from the comic books?
Well, we're definitely drawing from like one era, I think, of in terms of how she looks physically. Yeah, and I mean, she feels like a combo of a lot of things. And I think what's so great about Jess's writing is that Jessica Gao, she like knows these comics so deeply and I think is unconsciously drawing from all of them, but also just relates to this character and is speaking through her from a very human perspective, which is the other wonderful thing about Jen is that she like never totally gives over to the superhero thing, or if she does, there's with a little wink in it. Um, yeah, so she's doing it her own way. And I think Jess writes from that perspective too, of like pushing the boundaries of like how much can we not be reverent, like really like pull it apart.
What is it like to shoot the action scenes?
It's mostly not me. No, I mean it's me, but it's like we also have this amazing stunt team Matt and Sarah, who also played She-Hulk in the stunt sequences. And the two of them and me, we came up with these, like, we would like work together, not on like how to look cool fighting, but like, how does She-Hulk fight? How does she learn what her body is capable of, and like how little she needs to do to like flick a guy across the room, and how much fun she can have with that. The physical like vocabulary that we built together was my favorite part of those action sequences. Finding humor in it, finding like her identity in it, and finding her come into it.
I also really enjoyed the fact that we got to see Daredevil, and that it's not
Yeah.
just we got to see Daredevil, he stopped by to say hi. It's like he is a big part of this show, and there's a fun sort of real intense romance.
Mhm. Yeah, so much fun. I mean, Charlie was so game for um taking this character that he'd created and that had this legacy, and like putting him in a totally different tone, and like was so open to doing that, which is not easy as an actor, especially like when your character has like lived in one certain kind of world for so long, to like bring them into this like absurd goofball comedy. Like it, yeah, it was so much fun to watch him do that, and he's such a great actor. He was so much fun to play with. I really love that dynamic. I think it's really strong.
In a season full of great lines, I think the best one has to be your delivery of the, smashing Matt Murdock sometimes. Was was that on the page exactly like that? What did you add to that, or was just like you had it and you said it, it was great?
That was so that line from the smashing the fourth walls is what I do, or is like what I do, as opposed to Bruce smashing like cities, right? This was this idea that we talked about a lot in the double standard of like what Bruce is allowed to do versus how little I'm allowed to destroy anything and then immediately am punished like tenfold. Um, but that line, the like smashing Matt Murdock, I think was Zeb Wells' line, and I think he threw it at me like before that take or something. And then yeah, it was just classic She-Hulk.
Absolutely. And do you understand the significance of that X-Men question that you also asked with like the perfect tone?
I mean, I was a big fan of X-Men. Like that was kind of like the superhero movie that like my brother and I we like loved. We loved it so much. Um so like I think I know that it's important. But I also know, yeah, like that was like a big thing with the fans. It's always fun to like pull in the fans into the world, because they're so already invested in the world, and I feel like they're so part of how those stories get told, even if we're not like looking directly out at them. So it was nice to have them alongside me.
I did want to ask, is it always fun? Because I'm sure there are some fans who aren't very happy with certain things about She-Hulk. What is it like, just dealing with some negativity that comes up?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like there's no way to exist as and if I'm going to speak in binaries, like a woman superhero without flack, without resistance, without commentary. And what's so great about our show, again, and what Jess's writing does so brilliantly, is it foretells all of it. She knew this was going to be, she knew that She-Hulk couldn't exist in the world without like being trolled, like that this just would happen by virtue of her just existing. And so it's weaved into the story in a way that I think is really meta and fantastic, and self-aware and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I can ask you a question I think you can't answer, and then I'll find a way to ask it that you might be able to, which is,
Okay.
are there plans to see She-Hulk again that you can confirm or anything like that?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I feel like Instagram and whatever knows more than I do. So
So then, where do you think She-Hulk would best fit in? If there wasn't just a season two, where would you most like to see her again?
I mean, it would be fun to see her as part of a team, just because she hasn't really done that. She has her like team who are like mostly made up of non-superheroes, which is great. But it'd be cool to see what she's like on a team, because I don't know that it would be the easiest thing for her. I wonder how she would operate in that scenario.
would also be great to see her in the new Daredevil show, but theoretically that's going to be darker. So it'd be strange to have this, character who came from that world. Because I feel like, in a sense, it's easier to become lighter. To get darker feels a little bit,
Yeah, I'm
darker.
I'm curious because there are She-Hulk comics that go super dark. And so I think the character has that malleability. And as an actor, it would be incredibly fun to see how that, Mark does that quite a lot. Um, Tim Roth did that too with his character. But yeah, you're right. It is different to go the other way.
Also, from the cast, I think Ginger Gonzaga is really one of the standouts. I know I've been watching her for years in shows like Kidding, and now, on True Lies, which is fun because I feel like that's sort of a great successor to this show because it is, I think, somewhat tonally similar. I don't know if you've had the chance to see it.
Yeah, I mean, Ginger is, I'm so grateful for her. First day of shooting was she and I in the bar, like Jen and Nikki swiping, and Nikki sort of like prodding Jen, and that friendship was so. I mean, I just fell in love with Ginger immediately because first off, her brain works faster than anyone I've ever encountered. She is so funny, so on her feet, like just like going a mile a minute. And it's so much fun to play with. It keeps you so present and so alive. And to get to develop that friendship at the core of this show told me so much about who Jen is, why she loves Nikki, why she needs Nikki, why these two work together. Um, it's just like it's a special relationship. It's incredibly feminine. It's incredibly loving, and that isn't always part of these these franchises. That kind of like very human, very flawed, giggly, goofy friendship um, between two women where there's no competition. There's no, it's refreshing.
Well, on the note of a great show with a lot of women, I'm glad we're talking about She-Hulk, but I never thought there was another role that could be as good as the many roles you had on Orphan Black.
Mm.
And it's just that show was so strange, so great, and just so watchable. And I mean, I think I asked last time we met who your favorite clone was, and I think you said Helena. I don't know if
Yeah, yeah.
that's still where you stand. Who do you think would get along best with Jen or She-Hulk?
I think Cosima, and I think there's a little Allison in there too. I think there's like a focus to Jen and like a dedication to like holding true to who she is that feels very Allison to me. But I think Cosima would be fascinated by the science of it.
I'm also glad to hear that there's a, new series in the works, which of course is starring Kristen Ritter, who I don't think you've seen Jessica Jones, but I'd say that's probably the like most pitch black of all the Marvel shows, but also really terrific. Do you have any like I assume you're not involved with that show at all, but what is it like just to see that world continuing?
Yeah, I don't know anything about it. Like nothing. And yeah, I mean, I think for me, our story was done. And, there were little like spin-offy kind of things, but yeah, I feel like what we told was the story that I wanted to tell, and I'm curious what more there is. Yeah.
I also hope a lot of people discover the show, the original show, just because I think there are Marvel devotees who like see everything Marvel. I think there are also people who are like, here's a Marvel lead, now we're going to watch everything that person's in. And
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
don't know that people have the right expectations for Orphan Black because I don't think that's possible to have the right expectations. I still remember it was now, I think, almost a decade ago that it started in 2013. Um, and
I
it's like,
saw
I
that.
just
I was
remember
like, wait, what? It's so nuts.
And I just remember I was like, because I think it started on a Saturday night, which is always a strange sign. You're like, why is this show on a Saturday night? But then you're like, no, this show is definitely prime time. Is definitely something cool, and like just the music, you don't even know what to expect. And I just, again, it still stands out to me as one of the singularly strangest but most appealing shows I've seen.
I love the I love the descriptor of the strangeness. That is like a huge pride point for me. I love that.
Absolutely. And I enjoyed, I think is the wrong term, but seeing you on Perry Mason recently was also, I mean, that again, that sort of tends, I think, towards the pitch black also. But what was it like just to immerse yourself in this religious role?
Yeah, I mean that character, yeah, after doing Orphan Black, there was this feeling of like, okay, what's next? Like, what's in terms of just artistically, like, what is going to light me up the way that that show did? There's no way not to feel challenged every day working on a show like Orphan Black. But of course, like reading Perry Mason and reading this amazing character of Sister Alice, who is just who similarly like has this duality to her life, to who she is, this private and public persona split that she's trying to navigate as a young woman who's also like a commodity. It's all really interesting stuff for me. And the religious thing, I mean, like, you know, I grew up going to a Catholic French immersion school. And I think the only reason I went was because it was French immersion. My mom wanted me to learn French, but I knew all of that stuff and I was raised in that stuff. And so it's interesting to play a character who comes from that perspective, but who believes it, which is a stretch for me.
I'll also note I'm not Catholic and I didn't grow up in Canada, but I did go to a French immersion school. I'm not
Did
sure
you?
why exactly we had that in Massachusetts, but I took 13 years of French, and it's
No way.
not the most useful thing here in the United States, but
Yeah,
that's not something I usually share with someone I'm speaking to. So that's
I
cool.
love that. Yeah, I would not expect that in Massachusetts at all.
I think it's just a great way to engage with language. It's something that's very useful. I think Spanish is probably the right language to be speaking in the United States rather than French, but I
But
like
it's
French and, you
close.
know,
It's close. You can like there's connection for sure there.
and the Canadians sound a lot more like I do than the French people, so that's helpful.
Uh-huh.
So you don't make a lot of movies, at least recently, but some of them, you know, that seem like Stronger and Destroyer and of course Pink Wall are really good. And again, towards the more serious. Do you want to do more films in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. You know, a very different world. I think filmmaking right now, and I'm attached to like a few indies that are trying to find their funding and all of that. It's a wild world out there in terms of like people taking risks on smaller films that might not, you know, box office is such an incredibly potent thing. So I'm hoping that, yeah, because all of the scripts that I'm connected to are just like incredibly beautiful, strange, about everything that I'm interested in, and with directors who I'm very excited about. So hopefully we can get them going.
Well, I'm sure it's a real difference. Something like She-Hulk, which has this guaranteed like Disney Plus platform and Marvel fan base, and then something like Pink Wall, which again I love, but I wonder how many people have actually seen it because it's, you know, it's hard to just get an independent film out there like that.
Yeah, it's a really tough time in our industry right now. I feel like it's a hard time for actors and it's a hard time for filmmakers. There's the Marvels and the all of that of the world have taken over in such a huge way, and I was part of it, you know. But I see the way that we have changed in terms of how we value actors and how we value you know, the audition process seems to have gone away entirely. I have friends who throw hundreds of self tapes into what feels like the ether because no one's doing in-person auditions anymore. Um, and that's incredibly difficult. So much of why I loved acting and have always loved it is about connecting. Um, and when you're a working actor, auditioning is part of that work. And being in a room with directors, with producers, with writers, with readers. Like I love readers and auditions. You know, you get so much, you get to play. And I think we've gone in a direction that is, it's scary to me, you know, because it does take away that integral connection that makes you feel like an artist. Yeah, it's a hard time. It's a really hard time. And I'm like a huge advocate for, if you're not doing in-person auditions, which I understand, Zooming with people. You know what I mean? Like this, like we're actually connecting and we're talking and we're influencing each other or inspiring each other to bring up the fact that you learned French or whatever, you know, like it's a real connection, right? So that to me feels like it's being lost a little bit. And I'm a huge advocate for people to be seen in person live or on Zoom live, you know, to have that connection.
I'll say, I mean, for me, it's been great. I've been able to speak to a lot of below the line people, like, visual effects supervisors and makeup artists, people who didn't used to get, flown out for press tours and other things. And it's really great to have that because, yes, we're not in the same room, but also we're looking right at each other. We're focused on each other, and we can talk for as long as we want and really dig into stuff, which is very nice. And you can't
Yeah,
always do when you have physical limitations.
for sure, for sure. And I mean, it's great that you're talking to like visual effects people because I feel like that industry could stand to have a lot more light shone on it in terms of unionization, in terms of workload, in terms of expectations, all of that stuff that's put on that community that, or not that community, but those workers and those artists. I think there's a tendency to think of like, and it connects back to acting too. It's like, you love what you do, so there's no labor there, but there's a tremendous amount of labor. And I'm sure you feel similarly with your job. You know, there's like an incredible amount of work and research and labor that goes into, and presence and vulnerability and all of that goes into it. And that's work, you know?
Absolutely. And so you've been in a show where you were pretty much every character. I know we have to remember Felix and other people, but I mean, Orphan Black, you were so many characters, and then anchoring something like She-Hulk, and then a supporting role like Perry Mason. Do you have a preference for how prominent and how much sort of the show rests on your shoulders?
Not at all. Not at all. I love, I mean, it's such a wonderful joy to be number one on the call sheet because, and that I only say that because you're in every day and you're working, your muscles are warm. You're like, I think coming in as a day player or as an actor with two lines in a scene is the hardest thing any actor will ever do. And I have massive respect for people who come in for four lines or whatever, because the preciousness around that is so intense. The pressure is so intense. You don't always come into a warm set, or you're coming into a family that exists and you're sort of like, can I play too? So, being there every day is like the easiest thing in a lot of senses. But I love ensemble. I'm doing a play right now, and we're in rehearsal, and it is incredibly ensemble driven. And that coordination and that listening and that sharing is like delicious. It's the best,
Before we sign off, can you tell me a little bit more about that play?
It's called The Gray House. Laurie Metcalf's in it, Paul Sparks, Sophia Ann Caruso, Joe Mantello's directing, who's just astonishing. We're on day 9, so we're like deep in rehearsal right now, and yeah, it's and the play is, the writing. Levi Holloway is just an astonishing writer. And I don't want anybody to know anything about this before they come see it, if they're going to come see it, because when I read it, it blew my mind. I had so many questions. I was so moved and hit by it. And I would not have wanted any part of it spoiled. So I won't say anything.
I think that's the best attitude to approach everything. I mean, I see some weird stuff sometimes that I didn't mean to see because I try to, I'm like, oh, there's an actor I like in that. I'll go see it, and then I'm like, it's nice to go in, I think, blind to as much as you can.
Completely agree. Like I won't watch trailers. I don't read synopses. Like I just watched this horror movie called House the other day, Japanese horror movie from the 70s. I knew nothing about it. And then I wanted to read about it after I'd seen it with the context of having seen it, but just like being blown away that's what being an audience, that's what's so exciting about watching film and TV and theater.
I totally agree. And that's a great reason for any She-Hulk fans still watching to go check out Orphan Black right now and don't look anything up beforehand. Just find it and start watching.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
So it was very nice to see you again, Tatiana. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, great to see you again. Thank you.